The defense may call its next witness.
Thank you. The defense calls Dr. Edwin Cox.
Please raise your right hand. You do solemnly swear that the testimony you may give in the cause now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Please take the stand and state your name for the record.
My name is Edwin S. Cox,
Spell your last name, please.
C-O-X.
Okay. Dr. Cox, are you a licensed therapist?
Yes,
And do you have a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD?
yes, I do.
And is your bachelor's in economics?
Yes,
And your master's in marriage, family, and child counseling?
yes,
And your PhD in sociology or family therapy?
yes.
And when were you licensed?
I was first licensed in 1976.
And what is required to become licensed?
In California, the license requirements include a 2-year master's degree in marriage and family therapy, 3,000 hours of supervised clinical experience, and then successful completion of a written exam, and then successful completion of an oral exam.
And since the time you became licensed, have you been practicing as a family therapist?
Yes, I have.
And can you approximate for us how many client hours you think you may have logged in that period of time?
Probably over 15,000 hours.
And do you currently teach at the graduate level in this field?
Yes, I do.
And what is it that you teach?
I teach several courses in the marriage and family therapy program. I teach marriage counseling. I teach couple therapy. I teach a variety of courses related to that degree.
And these are people who are working on their master's degree?
Yes.
And what school are you teaching at?
It's called the California Family Study Center. It's in North Hollywood.
And are you active in any professional organizations?
Yes,
And could you tell us what professional organizations you're active in?
I'm active in several. The American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, and the American Family Therapy Academy.
In fact, have you been president of one of those organizations?
I was president of the Southern California Division of the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy.
And in October 1986, did you become the therapist for Kitty Menendez?
Yes,
And did you see her a total of 16 times between October 1986 and February 1987?
yes,
And were 3 of those sessions joint sessions with her and her husband, Jose Menendez?
yes,
And was one of those sessions with Jose Menendez alone?
yes.
With regard to your initial sessions with Kitty Menendez, what is the first step that you engage in whenever you begin treating a patient?
Well, the first thing I do is to listen to what caused them to call and come in. And then early, one of the things that I begin to do is to take a family history to learn about some of the issues from their family of origin that help them get to where they are today.
What is the importance of knowing about their family of origin?
Objection, proper comment.
Yeah, let's just get on to those matters for which the witness was called, please.
Did you take such a history of Kitty Menendez?
Yes, I did.
And were you able, during the course of time you were treating her, to arrive at certain diagnoses?
Yes,
And did you arrive at any diagnosis with regard to whether she had any alcohol or substance abuse problems?
yes.
And what was your diagnosis in that regard?
Well, she did have a dependence on alcohol and prescription drugs.
And what was the basis for your opinion in that regard?
She talked about her drinking patterns. She drank every day. She was proud that she drank cognac. And
What do you mean she was proud she drank cognac?
it was important to her that people think well of her, and I think she thought that cognac was a high-class alcohol.
Did you form an opinion as to whether this alcohol dependence was a recent phenomena or a long-term problem?
Yes, it was a long-term problem for her.
Did you form any opinion as to whether she was suicidal?
Yes.
And how is it that she came to be a patient of yours?
She was referred to me by a therapist in New Jersey who called me and said that he had a client who was moving to California, and he was worried about her depression and her suicidality.
So was that one of the first areas that you looked at
Yes.
with regard to her? And did you find her to be suicidal?
Yes.
What was the basis for that opinion?
Well, she talked of killing herself and of the depression and anger that she felt. And she talked about how she would do it. She talked about previous attempts at doing that. So it was a serious threat.
And what is the dynamic of suicide? Is this just exclusively someone who's in a great deal of pain, or does it have another purpose in a family setting, the impact of it?
Objection, proper opinion is irrelevant.
Overall,
Well, reasons for suicide are very complicated, but one of them would be it's too painful to be alive. Another reason would be that for some people, that's the only way of getting back at somebody and expressing their anger at someone.
And did you have any impression as to whether there was someone that she wanted to get back at?
Yes, I did.
And what was that? Who was that?
That was Jose, her husband.
And this was to punish him for something?
She was extremely angry at him for having had an extramarital affair that she knew about. And I think one of the main reasons that she was suicidal was because it was so hurtful for her and to punish her husband.
And in addition to punishing her husband, it would obviously have an impact on her children. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Objection, cause for speculation and move to strike.
Sus-
Proper opinion.
well, the objection is sustained. The answer is stricken as to the form of the question.
Did you have an opinion as to whether the impact this would have on her children was of significance to her?
Yes.
And what was that?
The impact on the children would have been secondary to her.
What do you mean by that? By that?
I think her purpose was to punish her husband, and she didn't think much about the effect on her children.
Did you diagnose her to be depressed?
Yes.
And did you find that to be a recent occurrence or a long-term problem?
No, initially I thought it might be just related to the discovery of the affair, but as I learned subsequently, it had been a long-term condition for her for many, many years.
And what are the symptoms of the depression? How did it manifest itself?
Well, sleeplessness, withdrawal, sometimes bursts of anger, but kind of withdrawal from life, lots of sadness, tears.
And when you say sometimes bursts of anger, bursts of rage, Is that one of the symptoms?
Well, when someone's depressed, they don't talk a lot. And so their feelings build up, and every now and then, in some people, those feelings emerge in bursts of anger or rage, as you said. That would be true.
Are those bursts of anger or rage always rational?
Can we clarify, is this a discussion of general symptomology or specific to Mrs. Menendez?
With regard to Mrs. Menendez, did you find that these were symptoms that she manifested? The
Yes.
ones that you've described?
Yes.
Okay, and with regard to her, would the bursts of rage be rationally based, or would they just be spontaneous explosions?
Well, with her, some,
Discussion and proper opinion by
Well,
foundation.
Sustained as to the form of the question. I think the witness used the phrase burst of anger.
Okay, bursts of anger. With regard to the bursts of anger, did you find that these would be rationally based or would just be something else?
Discussion and proper opinion.
You have to lay a foundation first.
Do you have information with regard to the symptoms that you've discussed?
yes.
And what information do you have with regard to the crime that you talked about?
Not the information itself, but how you got the information.
She told me about how she would have fits of crying, fits of anger. And the anger would be triggered by an event, and the response or her anger might be much more severe than the triggering event would have naturally caused.
You have you had information about her, not only from herself, but from her husband, is that
Yes.
correct? Did you find her to be an obsessive personality?
Yes.
And what was the basis for that opinion?
Well, the first meeting I had with her, she told me that she constantly read self-help books. And in our sessions together, she was very, very focused on her husband's affair. And it was very difficult for her to consider or discuss anything else.
And did she describe any efforts in connection with that affair? That struck you as
Yes, she
excessive.
did. When she found out about it, she wanted to find out everything about it. She went through her husband's American Express card receipts from his office. She even flew to New York, and she told me that she stood outside the address of the woman he had the affair with and waited for her to come out onto the street so that she could see her. And then she walked past her so that she could see her up close. And she was constantly thinking about her and her husband, the affair with her.
Now, you saw her you had 16 sessions,
16
is that correct?
seconds.
And did she talk about this woman, Louise, in the first session?
Every time, every session.
Did she seem to be able to get beyond Louise and deal with any other issues?
Discussion calls for speculation.
Rephrase the question, please.
Was Louise and the affair the focus of every session you had with her?
It would have been if it had been her choice, and the attempts that I made to move to other areas were difficult for me to move to other areas. She kept going back to that issue.
Did she appear to be consumed by this affair?
Yes,
Did she appear to be consumed by her own pain?
yes,
You are a family counselor in
Yes.
part, is that correct? Did you form an opinion as to the effect of this on her as a parent?
yes, I thought about that. I thought that she was not available.
At this point, I move to strike the speculation on part of the witness, lack of foundation.
Sustained.
Based-
Stricken.
Thank you. Based on your training and experience, having seen that she was depressed and obsessed and alcohol dependent and suicidal, were you able to form an opinion with regard to her availability as a parent?
Yeah.
Discussion and proper opinion calls for speculation.
Overall.
Yes, that's one of the things that we're trained to do in family therapy. The actions of any member of a family impact all the other members of the family. And so it was natural for me to be concerned or to be interested in her availability to the other members of her family. She was so focused on Jose and the affair that she was not available to, I think at that time, one of her sons was living at home. and she was not available for that relationship.
Is one of the things that you look at in a family where the alliances are, who is connected to whom?
Yes, it is.
And what opinion, if any, did you form in that regard in this family?
Objection, improper opinion.
Sustained. Sustained.
Were you able to make a determination as to who was the most important person in the family to Kitty Menendez?
Yes,
And what was that?
Jose was,
Your Honor, move to strike the speculation on part of the witness. Improper opinion.
Overruled, the answer will stand.
So it would have been Jose rather than the children.
oh, absolutely.
Is one of the things you look for in treating a patient whether they have any outside resources, relatives,
Yes.
family members, et cetera?
Yes, in someone who's suicidal, that's one of the first things we do is to find out what the support systems are, family members or friendship.
And did you find that she had any support system outside the family in terms of either friends or relatives?
No, she had recently moved from New Jersey to California. She had said that she had no friends in California and no relatives here. So the only real support for her at that time appeared to be her husband.
And what about friends from Princeton, from where she'd moved? Did she indicate she had close relations?
She said she had acquaintances, but she had really not formed close friendships with people in New Jersey and certainly didn't want them to know about what was going on with her.
And you had her family history, so you knew that she had a number of living siblings, 2 brothers and a sister. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes, but she didn't feel that they would be supportive.
Did she indicate that she had confided her problems in them?
Objection, calls for double hearsay.
Sustained.
Was Mrs. Menendez someone who was open about her problems, or was she very private?
Objection, vague as to in general or with this witness.
Yeah, rephrase the question.
In your experience with her, did you find her to be a very private person?
Yes,
Did you find that public appearance was extremely important to her?
very important to her, yes.
Did you discuss with her the option of divorce?
Yes,
And what was her position with regard to divorce?
Objection, calls for hearsay.
Overruled.
she told me that that was really out of the question. She did not want to consider that.
Why?
Objection, calls for hearsay.
Well, rephrase the question. It does call for possibly a conclusion on the part of the witness unless you phrase it as far as what you said.
Thank you. Did you discuss with her the advisability or the option of divorce?
Yes, we talked about the option of divorce.
And did she indicate to you what her feelings were in that regard?
Yes, she did not want to consider divorce. She stated that she loved her husband very much, although she was very angry with him, and that why should she divorce? She had no place to go.
And did she express any feelings with regard to what a divorce would say about her in the eyes of the community? In terms of whether it would be a personal failure of some sort? Or...
Yes, it was important. The appearances were very important, and a divorce would have demonstrated that that family had failed. And that was important to her that it not look that way.
That the family looks successful?
Yes,
And even if that meant staying in a very painful marriage?
yes.
Did she express to you any concerns with regard to her son Lyle and his girlfriends that struck you as inappropriate?
I think she said that Lyle was in Princeton at the time, and he had a girlfriend named Jamie, I think, that Kitty did not approve of. And she said that her husband also did not approve of her because she was older, and she said that she was taking him places sexually that he was not prepared to go. And that struck me as very odd.
Why?
Objection, improper opinion.
Sustained.
Did you discuss with her whether, strike that, is part of the therapeutic session to try and get someone to understand if they have some views that maybe are not very healthy for them to have, or to try and let them look at things a little bit differently?
Sometimes, yes.
And if you hear something that seems inappropriate or unhealthy, do you try to point that out to them and deal with those issues with them so they can get a new perspective?
Sometimes. I did not do that in this case.
Why?
I saw it as odd, but it was part of the pattern of her character, and it fit with who she seemed to be. So I wasn't going to debate that with her or try to say anything else about that.
Why was it part of the pattern of her character?
Well, I think, again, the appearances of the family were very important, and this wasn't just her opinion, it was Jose's too, according to her. But what she said was this would not have been a suitable wife for the family. It would not have been a trophy for the family. And that's what they wanted to see in a daughter-in-law.
Because of the various conditions you diagnosed, did you determine whether she was the kind of person who would be crying all of the time, or would there be periods when she could function?
Objection calls for speculation.
Overall,
She cried a lot of the time, but she talked about the times she had to pull herself together to go someplace, to a soccer game or to a tennis match or to some kind of an event. And then she talked about how she would then return from that and then feel sad again, but she had to pull herself together for the appearances of the family.
So she could function
Yes,
at times, is that correct?
yes,
Now, you said that you met with Jose Menendez jointly with Kitty on 3 occasions and
Yes.
by himself on 1, is that correct?
that's correct.
And were you able to make some determinations as to who he was?
let's rephrase that.
Was it important to understand Jose Menendez in order to help Kitty Menendez?
Yes,
And did you attempt to do so?
yes.
Okay. And who did you find him to be in
Let's rephrase that. Who he is was Jose Menendez, so you have to rephrase it.
What personality characteristics did you observe in him?
Okay. He was a very, very strong personality, very bright, quick, very dominating. His presence was felt every instant that he was in the room. Very much in control of every situation in our sessions together.
How would he demonstrate that control? Would he yell and take control of the conversation, or what would he do?
Well, he would take control of the conversation, but also he would indicate his opinion with a look or a word, and Kitty would react to that very quickly.
Did you react to that?
At first, I thought it was curious, and I would talk to him about that. And then it became very clear that once he made an opinion or a statement, that was a closed subject. He was not interested in discussing it or debating anything. So I came to learn that when he said something or looked a certain way, that the case was closed, or the conversation was closed for him.
And you said that you saw Kitty respond to these,
Yes,
one word or one look.
yes,
Is that correct?
yes.
And did she respond immediately if he
Oh, yeah.
made a
If she
gesture?
began to say something and I sensed that he didn't like what she was saying, he would look at her or he would grunt or something non-verbally or slightly verbally, and she would stop. It was very controlled by him.
Did he strike you as someone who was emotional?
Maybe he had emotions, but I sure never saw them. He was very, very much in control of his emotions.
Now, when you talk about someone who's in control of their emotions, it is part of what you look at whether they're going to make decisions based on emotion or not.
Yes,
And what was your opinion in that
my
regard?
opinion, he made decisions based on rationality, cognition, not emotions. Very unemotional decision maker.
Was saving the marriage important to him?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Did you discuss with him whether he wanted to stay in the marriage or wanted it to end?
Yes,
And what did he tell you he wanted in that regard?
he wanted the marriage to continue.
Why?
Did he say why?
Did he say why?
Yes, he did.
Okay, what did he say?
He said that divorce was out of the question and that was ridiculous.
Why? What did he say he wanted out of the marriage? What did he want from Kitty Menendez?
He wanted a wife. And one of the conversations that we had was, what does that mean? And Kitty wanted to have a friendship as part of the marriage. And it was very clear to him that a friendship was something different from what a husband and a wife had. What a wife was is somebody to be in the family and to take care of things.
Run the family?
Yeah, run the household. Yes,
Did Kitty seem to want more out of the relationship than that?
absolutely.
Was he willing to give her that?
Did you call for speculation?
Sustained.
Did he indicate whether he was willing to give her
Did he
more
say
than
that?
Did he say?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes. Did he say whether he was willing to meet her needs with regard to the love relationship she wanted?
He said he was not willing to work at being a friend with her, but was willing to work at keeping the marriage as husband and wife.
Was it a sort of a business arrangement he was describing?
Objection, call for speculation.
Sustained.
Was there any emotional content in the relationship he was describing?
For Kitty, yes. For him, maybe, but I didn't see it.
The last session you had, was it a joint session?
Yes, it was.
And did you indicate to them where you wanted to go with the therapy?
Yes, the immediate threat for suicide was over. And my recommendation to them was to begin to look at their relationship and the family relationships, to begin to build some trust between them, to build some cooperation between them, and then to look at their family relationships.
And when you talk about family relationships, would you be talking about the relationships between Kitty and Jose and their relationships with their children, with their two sons?
My rationale, yes. Primary relationship would have been between the husband and wife. And once that begins to improve, the relationship with the children would then follow, or could then follow. But the primary purpose for me was to work on their relationship as husband and wife.
Okay. But did you indicate to them that you wanted to explore their relationships with their children as well? When you talk about exploring family issues?
No, I don't think I did. I may have thought it. I don't remember if I said it or not.
Okay, so you think you just expressed in terms of exploring family issues?
I said family issues, yes.
Did they ever come back?
They never came back.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Any examination on behalf of Eric Menendez?
Dr. Cox, you've been in practice then since 1976?
Yes,
And you've treated a number of married couples, would that be fair to say?
yes.
Dr. Cox, is it unusual for a woman who's been married for 24 years to be depressed over the fact that her husband's had an 8-year-long affair?
No,
And when someone is trying to recover from that particular kind of trauma, does the presence of the offending spouse within the household regenerate feelings of betrayal?
yes,
So in other words, if you throw the guilty party out and recover, it's easier, isn't it, than if you continue in the relationship and wonder every day, is he going to betray me again? Wouldn't you agree?
If you thought you could rebuild your life by leaving, then yes. If you thought that your life would be over by leaving, then no.
And Mrs. Menendez very much wanted to stay in the marriage, is that correct?
Yes,
And from your assessment of Mr. Menendez, he, for his own reasons, wanted to continue in the marriage as well.
yes,
Now, when you saw Mrs. Menendez, I believe you indicated there were 16 times total. The first session would have been on the 29th of October. So that would have been 7 years ago today of 1986, correct?
yes,
And that was the very first time you saw her.
yes,
She was a referral from back east.
right.
And how long were the sessions that you had with her?
1 hour.
Then I believe I think the last session was February the 3rd of 1987. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that sounds correct.
And 3 of the 16 sessions you had were joint sessions with Mr. Menendez, correct?
Mr. and Mrs. Menendez.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
joint sessions with both of them, correct?
Yes,
And then you had one session with him alone.
yes,
So you actually only had 12 sessions with Mrs. Menendez alone.
yes,
All right, and that would have been then 12 hours alone with Mrs. Menendez.
yes.
Now, when you saw her, was she there voluntarily or was she there because of a court order or some other kind of force? In other words, did she come in of her own free will or was she forced to come in?
She was urged to come by her previous therapist in New Jersey.
Okay, but to your
Yeah.
knowledge, he didn't have any means of forcing her.
No, she called and made the appointment on her own.
And when Mr. Menendez came to see you, did it appear to you that he walked in under his own free will or was he in handcuffs or some other form of force?
He came because I called him the day before and said, your wife is talking about committing suicide and I'd like to see you.
And so he came.
Yes.
Okay. And did he give you any problems about coming the next day? In other words, did he say
No. He was very cooperative.
Okay, so he didn't say, I've got a business meeting, I'm too busy, deal with it yourself.
No, he said, I've got a business meeting. Can we change the time?
But he came in.
Yes,
Right. And that would have been, do you recall the first occasion that you saw Mr. Menendez?
yes.
What date was it? Do you recall?
If you'd like me to look at my notes, I can tell
Certainly.
you. All right.
Do you have the notes? I have them.
I have them. I am here.
Okay.
On November 6th, 1986.
All right. And I believe you indicated that the reason that you called him is because you were fearful. Is that correct? That Mrs. Menendez was in a very bad state.
I knew she was in a very bad state.
All right.
Yes.
Did you get her permission to call him or did you do it on your own?
I told her that because of her state that I was going to invite her husband to come. And then I called him and talked to him about my fear, yes, that she was suicidal and that she might indeed kill herself.
I believe you indicated that by February the 3rd of 1987, which was your last session, that you felt that the immediate threat of suicide had passed. Is
Yes.
that correct? Okay. I have to finish the question, otherwise the court reporter is going to have a very tough time. Okay, Dr. Cox. So about what time was it that you felt that the suicide threat had passed? If you recall, in between the 29th of October and the 3rd of February.
Objection to state testimony.
Rephrase the question.
You indicated by the 3rd of February of 1987 that you felt that the threat had passed.
Objection to state the testimony.
Overall,
Would that be a fair summarization of your testimony?
I'd say that the threat had lessened. The threat came and went during the time that I had seen her, but it had lessened at that time.
Now, you talked about the fact that in discussing her suicide ideas with you, that her primary focus was not on her sons. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yes,
Okay. But as far as you know, she never did commit suicide, correct? Right?
right.
And and as long as you were treating her, she did not.
That's correct. She did not commit suicide
Right.
while
So
I
when,
was treating her, yes.
and so she was talking to you about these things that she was thinking about, correct?
Yes,
Now, in regards to this, you said she was obsessive and that one of the things you found her obsessive about was the affair of her husband, correct?
yes.
As a family counselor, could you describe to me a healthy, normal response of a woman to finding out that her husband of 24 years has had an 8-year affair? What should a woman do that's normal and healthy?
There's no right answer to that question.
Now, were you aware of the fact that during the period of time that Mrs. Menendez saw you, you were aware she hadn't many friends, correct?
Right.
She had no family members she felt she could turn to aside from her husband.
Right.
Were you aware of whether or not she was employed outside of the home?
I believe she was not.
Did you have any indication that she had anything in her life aside from her family to affirm her sense of well-being?
Yes,
And what was that?
that was the remodeling of their house.
All right. And were you aware that at times she had difficulty with the remodeling process?
Yes,
And frustrations over the remodeling process?
yes.
Right. So aside from the remodeling of her house and her family, were you aware of any other activities or events that were life-affirming for Kitty Menendez during the period of time you treated her?
No.
This was a woman who was fairly alone. Would you say that would be correct?
Yes.
Now, do you remember referring to your notes of the 17th of December of 86? Could you look at those notes, please, for a moment?
I'm sorry, what was-
December the 17th of 86.
Yes.
All right, let's wait till council gets hers. Do you see the first entry under those notes, which is that excited about Lyle arriving tonight?
Yes.
Do you recall that Mrs. Menendez, when she talked to you on the 17th of December of 86, was in fact excited about the return of her son from Princeton?
Yes.
Okay, so she did speak about her son, Lyle, at least once in positive terms during the period of time that you saw her.
Oh, yes.
Did she ever speak positively about her other son in your presence, if you recall?
I think so.
Now, are you aware, of Mrs. Menendez's state of mind on August the 20th of 1989?
I'm not gonna address this question.
Do you understand the question?
1989, no.
Okay, Dr. Cox,
After I saw her,
The question on it is argumentative.
Overruled. Your answer. You were in the process. of
would you
answering.
repeat the question, please?
Dr. Cox, August the 20th, 1989 is the night that Kitty Menendez died.
Oh,
Do you know what she was thinking the night she died?
no,
Do you know if she was taking drugs that night?
no,
Do you know if she had anything to drink that night?
no.
In fact, the last time you ever saw her was on the 3rd of February of 1987. Is that correct?
I think so. That's correct.
And I believe you indicated that you talked to her during that session about working on some family issues and that you never saw her again.
Correct.
Were you made aware of the fact that she saw a different therapist shortly after leaving you?
Was I made aware of that?
Yeah. Were you aware of the fact that in approximately March of 1987, Mrs. Menendez went to see a different therapist?
Yes.
Thank you. I have nothing.
Any redirect?
Yes.
Dr. Cox, you indicated that when you thought that Kitty Menendez was an immediate suicide risk, you called Jose Menendez and asked to see him the next day.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And he had to change the time, but he did come in the next day. Is that correct?
Yes, he did.
Was he concerned about her killing herself?
Yes.
And if the threat wasn't death, but merely her pain, did he seem to share an equal amount of concern?
Objection, calls for complete and bail.
Sustained.
How did you determine that he was concerned about her killing herself?
Well, he responded immediately. He came in and he was very cooperative.
Now, with regard to her non-life-threatening issues that were merely painful for her, did he demonstrate the same degree of concern?
No, he didn't. While there was an active threat, he was very concerned about eliminating that threat of suicide. And he asked my advice on what he should do about that. And we talked about staying with her and talking to her and being available to her. When that threat was lessening, then he became less available and was not so solicitous then.
Did he appear to share the same concerns that Kitty Menendez did with regard to public image?
Yes.
You were asked about the threat, the fact that the threat had lessened, but you referred to the fact that the suicide threat would come and go.
Yes.
Is that unusual? inpatients that they'd be suicidal, they'd get a little better, then they would get suicidal again? Is that a fairly common?
That's not unusual.
Excuse me. Mrs. Bazanich asked you if she had any life-affirming activities outside of her family. Do you remember that question?
Yes.
And you mentioned the remodeling of the house.
Yes.
Is one of the things that you suggest to depressed patients is that they get involved in other things, they
Yes.
exercise or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And
And
we
did,
talked about that, and I, in fact, called her physician, her medical physician, to ask him to discuss physical exercise with her. And he said that he had done that.
Mrs. Bazanich asked you about the family being life-affirming. Did Mrs. Menendez seem to look to her children as a source of life-affirming qualities?
I don't know.
When she described,
Have you finished your answer?
I don't know how to answer that question.
let me ask you this. Who was the most important person in her life?
Jose,
And is that who she needed approval from
yes,
and love from?
yes, absolutely.
Did her sons seem to be of anywhere near the equal importance to Jose in her life?
No, they're,
An improper opinion, Mr. Strike.
Overall, you may complete your answer.
no, they're by far secondary to that, and they were important to her in that they provided the appearance of a family and success. And their success was important to her because it reflected on the success of the family.
Okay. But she didn't describe a close emotional relationship with either of her children?
No,
Is it typical of people who are depressed that they have difficulty in getting involved in emotional relationships, having the energy to make that kind of connection?
could you repeat the question,
Yes.
please?
Is there a connection between being depressed and being emotionally unavailable?
Yes, many people who are depressed withdraw from interpersonal relations, and they are unavailable to those around them. Yes,
And were you able to make any determination as to whether that was the condition with Mrs. Menendez and her son, that her own problems got in the way of
Yes.
having a relationship?
yes. She was very withdrawn from her children.
And did you have the impression that this was a recent phenomena or one of long standing?
Petition calls for speculation.
Sustained.
You indicated that that you believed she had been depressed for a long time.
Yes,
Would you expect that this emotional condition, this emotional unavailability would have been a component of that depression that she had experienced for a long time?
yes.
And when you say a long time, are you talking about it was 6 months before she got to California, or are you suggesting that it went back much further?
Petition calls for speculation.
Rephrase the question.
What is your definition of long standing with
In
regard?
this case, it was all her life.
I have nothing further.
All right, anything else?
Dr. Cox, do people choose to be depressed?
It's an interesting question. Maybe some do.
Are there chemical components to depression as well, biological components to depression?
It can be, yes.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Nothing further.
Okay, thank you. You may step down. You're excused.
Thank you.
Your next witness.
My name is Roger R. Smith,
What are you asking?
SMITH.
Mr. Smith, at one time, were you a senior vice president and chief financial officer for Live Entertainment?
Yes, I was.
And would you tell us what the length of your employment by Live Entertainment was and what titles you held over time at that company?
I began to work for the company in August of 1987 with the titles you just mentioned, senior vice president and chief financial officer, and member of the board of directors. In August or September, I believe, of 1989, I was made executive vice president, but also acting president, and remained with the company in that capacity until 1990. At that point, I became an executive of Live's parent company, Carolco.
And how long did you remain with the parent company, Carolco?
I was executive vice president of Carolco until the middle of last year, and I'm no longer an executive, but I am on the board of directors of Live and was on the board of directors of Carolco until recently.
You're still on the board of Live?
Yes, I am.
And by whom are you currently employed?
I am starting my own independent film company at this time.
And have you been employed in various aspects of the entertainment industry for even before you went to work for Live?
Yes, prior to coming to Live for 10 years, beginning in 1974, I was a vice president of Warner Communications, which is now Time Warner, in various financial capacities there.
And has your work in the entertainment industry been focused on financial aspects of the business?
Yes, primarily.
And what is your educational background?
I have a bachelor's degree from Harvard and took some courses toward an MBA, but did not complete it.
And after graduating from Harvard, where did you go to work?
Went to work on Wall Street with a firm called Wood Struthers and Winthrop, where I was an investment analyst specializing in a variety of industries, including the entertainment industry.
Now, when you worked for Warner Communications, who was your boss?
The chairman, Steve Ross.
In August of 1987, when you went to work for Live Entertainment, was it Live Entertainment then, or was it still IVE?
It was still called International Video Entertainment, IVE.
And when did it change and become Live? L-I-V-E.
Right. Well, following a merger with a company called Lieberman Enterprises, which was a public company, the new company became Live Entertainment, I believe, in February or March of 1988.
And when you went to work for the company in August of 87, where were the company offices?
In Newbury Park.
And at some point, did the company offices move?
Yes, in June of 1989, we moved to new quarters in Van Nuys.
And when you went to work for the company in August 1987, who was the president of that company?
Well, Jose Menendez was chairman, president, and chief executive officer.
And your role was chief financial officer?
Correct.
And is there a chain of command in such a company?
Yes, there is. I would, I guess, in effect, have been the number two to Jose, as I was the only other member of management who served on the board of directors.
So you and Mr. Menendez were on the board. He was the chairman. You were the CFO, chief financial officer.
Correct.
And in that capacity as number two to Mr. Menendez, did you come in contact with him on a daily basis?
Absolutely.
Did you work with him on all major projects of the company?
Virtually all, yes.
And do you believe, and excuse me, for the 2 years that you worked with Mr. Menendez, Mr. Smith, do you believe that you got to know his personality, his personal philosophies, and his style in dealing with people well?
Yes.
How would you describe your relationship with Mr. Menendez over those 2 years?
Testy would be one word. We were, there was clearly no affection between or real friendship between the two of us. But I think we were both correct in a way with each other.
And for your part, Mr. Smith, why was there no affection from you to Mr. Menendez?
I didn't like Mr. Menendez. I didn't find him very likable.
What was there about him that you disliked?
Objection, vague.
Sustained.
Was your dislike based on something he had done to you, or based on his personality, his personal style, more global issues?
Almost entirely based on his behavior toward others rather than toward myself, particularly other employees of the company.
And without giving us specific stories, what was his behavior towards other employees of the company that you disliked?
Totally controlling, belittling, and instilling fear.
And under what circumstances would you observe him behaving in belittling and fear-instilling ways towards other employees?
Constantly throughout the business day, you would be in meetings with 1, 2 other people or larger meetings with the entire staff at times.
And in those meetings, did he characteristically treat people, or rather uniformly treat people in a particular way?
Well, characteristically, he treated them in a way that I would call sort of entrapment. He would get them to say things which he would delight if he could lead them down a path where they were clearly wrong and then expose them in front of others as having been wrong.
And did this cause humiliation?
It did. At the same time, he did also have another side of way of dealing with people. Sometimes that he would make them feel good. He would constantly be going one way or the other. You didn't know with him.
What do you mean you didn't know? What didn't you know?
Well, my observation was that his basic approach was to constantly be in a position of control exercised through this uncertainty as to where you stood with him. But in order, obviously, to get performance out of people, he would alternate between never praise. He didn't go that far, but sometimes he could be charming and then turn a completely different side to you.
And did this make people sort of unbalanced? They didn't know what to expect from him?
Yes.
Pause for speculation.
Overrule the answer of staff.
Was there ever any component in his style of intimidation?
I don't understand the question.
Did he behave in an intimidating way?
Absolutely.
And what kind of behavior would you characterize was intimidating?
Well, he had a very clear way of letting you know through a word, a gesture, a look, exactly how you were displeasing him. And would sort of you learn to be fearful of getting one of those looks or gestures.
In your opinion, Mr. Smith, were the other employees that worked in proximity to Mr. Menendez afraid of him?
Sustain.
Was there an atmosphere of fearfulness at the company?
Yes, there was, in my opinion.
How would you describe, strike that. Did you form an opinion based on your conversations with Mr. Menendez and in watching him interact with other people about how he felt about showing any vulnerability or weakness to others?
Oh, I formed an opinion based on direct statements by him that the worst thing you could ever do, and this was an occasional criticism of me, was to show vulnerability, concern for the other person's point of view.
Did he ever make a statement to you about his unwillingness to ever show his own weakness to anyone else?
He never made a verbal statement, but I observed it constantly.
Now, Mr. Smith, did dealing with Jose Menendez create what for you was a pleasant work environment?
No, quite the contrary.
And you worked there for 2 years?
2 years prior to Mr. Menendez's death, yes.
Did you have a contract?
Yes.
Go ahead.
He had offered me a 3-year contract. At my first impressions of him were sufficiently, I had questions about the kind of person he was, and I insisted on a 2-year contract, which was in fact up on August 31st, 1989.
And was it your intention prior to Mr. Menendez's death to renew that contract to stay on with the company?
It was my intention to walk into his office on September 1st, resign, and tell him precisely why I was going to resign.
And without all the details, why were you going to resign?
Because of him, his behavior toward people, his business ethics, and his style.
concerning that style, did he convey to you his philosophy of management?
Yes.
What was that?
I remember a very specific incident where, after having humiliated a middle-level employee, and as the employee left his office and leaving me alone with Jose, he saw the look on my face, and I said, and he turned to me and with a sort of smile and said, I've always thought, Roger, it was far better to be feared than to be loved.
And was that a philosophy that you saw in action over the 2 years that you worked with him?
Yes.
Now, were there meetings at which you observed Jose Menendez practice this entrapment that you've described?
Yes.
And was there a method that he used to entrap people?
Yes, I actually think it's called sort of Jesuitical. I mean, he would literally draw you in a logical way and say, well, now, oh, that's very interesting. If what you're saying is true, then such and such must follow. And the person would say, well, yeah. And they say, well, now, then Menendez would say, well, if such and such is true, then is it fair to conclude such and such? And pretty soon he had the person agreeing to some absolute absurdity. And then he would sort of close the book or whatever he was doing, dismiss the person and tell them that they didn't know anything of what they were talking about. But he had, having delighted in drawing out this utterly useless, from a management standpoint, process.
And at the end of it, would he insult the person?
No, the insult was implicit.
Did you ever hear him actually calling people stupid?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, there were explicit ones.
Now, you said he delighted in this. Was that your opinion, that he enjoyed doing this?
That was my opinion.
Did he have a way in which he displayed anger towards people?
Yes, his way was getting, first of all, lowering his voice to a near whisper and making what appeared to be a visible effort to keep himself under control.
And what do you mean by a visible effort to keep himself under control?
Well, he became like a coiled spring. You were with the sense that any moment he was going to lose this control, but he became more and more controlled and lowering his voice to barely audible.
And this controlling himself, did it appear that he was physically controlling himself?
Yes.
Controlling himself from a physical outburst?
Objection, call for speculation.
Overall. Yes, I think there was a sense communicated that if you went too far with him, and I frequently did go too far because I disputed with him on things, that there could be even a physical outburst.
Where he could attack you?
Or explode in some explosive anger.
Did you ever hear him raise his voice in anger?
Yes.
Did you ever hear him talk about anger and raising one's voice?
Yes, I recall a particular meeting which involved Peter Hoffman, the then chief executive officer of Carolco, the parent company, myself and Jose, in which Peter raised his voice and Jose then lowered his and said, you know, if you want to start raising voices, I'll show you who can raise voices. I grew up in a house where my father shouted, and I will not. And he kept, as I say, lowering and lowering his voice as he delivered this speech about how he would not tolerate anyone raising his voice. On the other hand, I heard him other times when he wanted to for effect, because I don't think Jose ever did anything out of control. For effect, he would raise his voice, certainly.
And at this particular, now Mr. Hoffman was Mr. Menendez's boss, wasn't he?
Yes, in a sense. He was the chief executive of the majority shareholder of the company, so he was his indirect boss.
Much higher up than Mr. Menendez was.
Higher up.
Okay. And how would you describe the effect on yourself, for example, of this lowering and whispering that Mr. Menendez did at that meeting?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Were you intimidated by it?
I was intimidated only in the sense that he created an unpleasant day-to-day working environment. I knew that I always had the ability to walk on my contract. I also felt that I was competent at my job and performing extremely well for the company, which I truly cared about. And that's why, leaving the company would have been a problem for me because I believed in a lot of the other people and what we were doing.
So you weren't personally fearful, but it made it very unpleasant.
Yes, particularly as I tried sometimes to, I didn't accept his opinion as the final word, and everyone else in the company did.
Now, you said something about Mr. Menendez's style to be controlling. How important or how large an issue was controlling people and things to Mr. Menendez?
There can cause for speculation.
Sustained.
In your opinion,
Proper opinion.
gee, I hadn't even
Finish your
gotten-
question.
I'm sorry.
In your opinion, let me strike that. In your opinion, strike that. Based on your observations, to what extent did Mr. Menendez, by his actions and words, control the people and situations around him?
Proper opinion calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Can you describe how Mr. Menendez would prepare for a meeting?
Objection irrelevant.
You'll have to focus that a little bit.
Would the way he conducted meetings and set up for meetings, did that demonstrate the methods in which he tried to control things?
Yes, it did, down to the point of where each person sat in the room, who would have the sun in whose eyes, et cetera, assuming the meetings with outsiders.
Now, you had, over the course of your life, worked with successful businessmen other than Mr. Menendez.
Mm-hmm. Correct?
Had you worked with people who were considered tough businessmen?
Yes.
Had you worked with people who were domineering in their business styles?
Yes.
Had you worked with other people for whom control was an issue?
Yes.
Was there anything remarkable in your experience about Mr. Menendez?
Objection is proper opinion.
Overall. Do you understand the question?
Would you repeat it, please?
Yes, with respect to the issue of control, was there anything remarkable about Mr. Menendez?
He certainly went far beyond anything I had observed in the entertainment industry, where there's a lot of flamboyant personalities.
And a lot of strong personalities?
Absolutely.
Have you described Mr. Menendez in the past as the ultimate control freak?
I believe I've used those words, yes.
And is that how
I
he
did.
struck you?
Yes.
Now, with respect to his management at the company, did he just concern himself with the big picture and the big details, or was he concerned also with rather small things?
He was concerned with everything that went wrong, however small. He would delegate authority to people in broad areas because, frankly, in my observation, he was not a particularly hard worker. He was somewhat lazy. He was a brilliant thinker about business, and he would tell people to go off and do it. And if there was no problem, then it'd be fine. But the slightest little thing deviating from what he thought you should have done could be raised into a major fight.
Do you know what the term micromanagement means?
Yes.
Is that a term that you have used in describing Mr. Menendez?
Yes, but I would make this point that it was sporadic. You didn't know when he was either going to let you entirely alone or micromanage down to the tiniest detail.
Now, did you, strike that, did you observe whether Mr. Menendez ever tolerated weakness in people who worked for him?
Well, he certainly appreciated weakness in people in their dealings with him.
Why was that?
Because he wanted to control people. And any signs of independence were not welcome. But in terms of dealing with others, he wanted you to be very tough in your dealings with anyone outside. I mean, tough to the point of what I regarded as borderline unethical behavior.
Did you ever observe him to exploit the weakness in other people?
Absolutely.
Did he ever express to you feelings of compassion or concern for the other workers in the company?
Only in the most general sort of way, not in anything specific.
You've indicated that he wasn't particularly hardworking. What were his usual hours at work?
He would tend to get to the office between 9:30 and 10, and most days leave at 5 or 5:30. Sometimes he had an outside appointment, or at least he said he did.
Did he take lunch
Yes,
on a regular basis?
he usually went out for lunch.
Did he work on weekends?
On numerous occasions where I needed to reach him on the weekend, he was often unreachable, and I would leave messages and they would not be returned
So was he basically incommunicado on weekends?
frequently,
Did he ever work in the office on the weekends?
on rare occasion.
Now, did he travel in conjunction with his job?
Yes.
And was he sometimes gone on weekends traveling, or was he always in Los Angeles, as far as you knew, on weekends?
Objection, lack of foundation.
Sustained.
Was there business travel in the company on weekends?
Generally, most trips avoided the need to travel on weekends, unless it was a trip to Europe or something like that.
Was there a trip to Europe that you went on company business in January of 1989?
Objection, irrelevant.
Overruled to that question.
Yes, there was.
Was Mr. Menendez supposed to go on this trip?
Yes,
Irrelevant.
Overruled.
yes, he was.
And did you learn at the last moment that he wasn't going?
The last moment being a day after he was supposed to have arrived in Amsterdam. First, we'd been told he'd missed his plane or was going to come later. And the next thing we learned that he wasn't coming at all.
And was there a health reason given for his missing that trip?
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
Did you subsequently learn that he had been?
You'll have to establish a foundation as to how he would learn.
First of all, when you returned from that trip, did Mr. Menendez's secretary, Marzi Eisenberg, give you some instruction from him?
Yeah, they were instructions from her, which I presume were from him.
Okay. And what was the instruction?
Objection, calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Your Honor, this is to reflect strength. Did you learn that he had suffered some kind of a heart attack?
Objection, Your Honor, that calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
We have another one. Do you recall if the date that you were in Amsterdam when Mr. Menendez was supposed to show up was around January 22nd or 23rd, 1989?
I believe that's correct.
If I may approach, Your Honor. Mr. Smith, showing you this record from the Beverly Hills Medical Center, do you see that that's a record admitting Jose Menendez for possible angina on January 22nd, 1989?
Yes.
Now, did Mr. Menendez tell you at any time that he had a heart problem?
No.
Were you aware that there was a clause in his employment contract where the company was to pay the premiums on a $5 million policy for which he could name any beneficiary he wanted?
Yes, I was aware.
Were you aware that no such policy was ever written?
Yes.
Were you aware that Mr. Menendez was delaying taking the physical for that policy?
Yes.
Were you aware that he was repeatedly reminded to take the physical and kept putting it off?
Yes.
As of January 1989, did Mr. Menendez have a very large chunk of live stock and stock options?
Yes, he had been granted what were, I believe, 300,000 shares, then selling at around $20 a share.
And did he frequently in conversations with you express his deep concern for the price of the stock?
Your Honor, objection, hearsay and irrelevant.
Lay a foundation as to when.
Well, first, did you have conversations with him? If I could do it this way, it's easier, Your Honor. About his interest in and concern for the price of the stock.
Oh, absolutely.
And when was it?
Well, his grant of stock, I believe, came in early 1988. And from that moment, my observation was that he was intensely interested in the price of the stock. And as part of my dealings, my duties were to deal with Wall Street, this became extremely critical to him that this be done absolutely correctly.
And in your opinion, given your financial background and the size and structure of this company, would ill health on the part of the chairman and president of this company have affected the price of the stock?
Your Honor, improper tenure, lack of foundation.
Overall,
Yes, it could have affected it.
Now, did you ever tell anyone that Jose Menendez, strike that, the trip to Amsterdam, was it an important trip?
Yes, we were meeting with our main bankers, Credit Lyonnais, actually in Rotterdam, and it was to negotiate the terms of a new bank agreement.
And a company like Live, like many companies, needs bank money to operate, do they not?
Yes, absolutely.
And did you ever mention to anyone that Mr. Menendez hadn't taken that trip or why he hadn't taken that trip?
I was at first instructed by Marcy to tell people that he'd been on the trip. I told her that I couldn't do that. And she said, well, then just don't say anything.
Did Mr. Menendez have a particular method of firing people?
13 irrelevant.
overall.
I don't recall, I don't think I was present when he specifically fired people.
All right, you've answered the question.
Did you notice a pattern where he would appear, you had said that he sometimes went hot and cold with people. He'd be very intimidating, humiliating, and then he'd sort of be charming and nice. Did you ever see him set people up for firing by being nice and then fire them behind their back?
Objection, posture speculation on part of the witness.
Sustained.
Now, you've indicated that he didn't work long hours, and clearly you didn't like Mr. Menendez, but was he generous with his employees?
Objection, irrelevant.
Overall.
Quite the contrary. I mean, I remember there was a specific attempt by me and several other people in the company in the year in which he'd received $1 million bonus himself to give the hourly workers. We tried at first for 2 weeks' pay at Christmas. He flatly said no. And finally, after a major fight, one of the few times where it came to an actual open fight with Jose, he agreed to 1 week, but was unhappy about doing that.
Do you know who Devendra Mishra is?
Yes, of course.
And was Mr. Mishra an employee of Live?
Yes, he was also a senior vice president of the company at that time.
And in your opinion, Mr. Smith, did Mr. Mishra do very valuable work for the company?
Objection, improper opinion.
Overall, you can ask the question.
Absolutely.
And in your opinion, did Mr. Menendez reward Mr. Mishra for the work that Mr. Mishra had done for the revenue he had caused for the company?
Objection, improper opinion.
Sustained.
Now, were you ever in a position where you could witness how Mr. Menendez managed aspects of his family?
Yes, I had various opportunities to do so. In fact, because we'd spent a great deal of time together, including traveling together. And I would be frequently in his office when he received telephone calls from his wife, or at other times I was present when he received phone calls from, I specifically remember one call from his son Lyle.
And what was your impression based on what you saw and what you heard about how Mr. Menendez managed? First of all, did he manage his family?
Well, I was astounded to hear him taking a phone call from his wife to discuss what kind of pizza they were going to have for dinner that night, since he was a busy man running a $300-400 million company.
And who was deciding what kind of pizza they were going to have?
Jose.
Did his wife, did Mrs. Menendez call frequently?
Yes.
How frequently?
I can remember a particular meeting of maybe an hour's duration where there were 3 phone calls.
Did she call every day?
I would not be able to speak to that exactly.
Okay. But you're aware of days when she would call 3 times within an hour?
Yes.
And did you overhear conversations between Mr. Menendez and his wife where he is making the kinds of decisions you've just described, pizza toppings, for example?
Yes.
Now, you said that you also overheard conversations he had with his sons.
I have a specific memory of a conversation he had with his son Lyle, where I, of course, only heard Jose's end of the conversation.
From Jose's end of the conversation, what was it about?
Objection, hearsay.
Lyle was seemingly, from what I heard from Jose, having some personality difficulties with his then roommate. I believe he was at Princeton at the time.
Okay.
And I listened to Jose advising him on how to deal with the problem, et cetera, in a very specific way that I remembered when I was in college. I wouldn't have dreamed of calling my father on such a matter.
And how long did this conversation take place?
The length of the conversation?
Yeah, that was what I
Oh,
meant.
sorry.
It wasn't English when it came out.
Right. About 10 minutes, I'd say.
And where did it take place?
We were actually traveling, I think, somewhere in the East Coast, and then he was in a car on a car phone.
So this took place when Mr. Menendez was in a limousine of some kind?
Yes,
And talking to Lyle Menendez about Lyle's roommate.
yes.
And did it appear from this conversation that he's giving Lyle specific, detailed advice of what to say and what to do?
Yes.
And did it appear from the conversation from Mr. Menendez's remarks that Lyle was in any way disagreeing with him? Or did,
Cause for speculation.
Sustained.
did Mr. Menendez correct or criticize Lyle during this conversation?
My recollection is that he gave him exact advice on what to say, what to do, and it involved standing up and being tough was what I remembered.
Okay. Did you, on more than one occasion, overhear a telephone conversation between Mr. and Mrs. Menendez about what to have for dinner that night?
Yes, I believe I just said so.
Now, did you observe Mr. and Mrs. Menendez together?
Yes, on some of the trips that we made to New York, business trips, Kitty Menendez would accompany her husband, so we spent lengthy time together on planes and some portion of the time when we'd be in New York.
And did you ever notice anything that looked like spontaneity between the two of them?
Objection, cause for speculation.
Sustained.
Well, can you tell the difference between can you tell when someone is being spontaneous?
Yes, I think so.
And did you see in this family, from what you saw as between Mr. and Mrs. Menendez, what you heard when you overheard conversations? And I take it you also saw the brothers from time to time.
Eric only rarely, Lyle more, because of course he worked at the company one summer. But my observation of when I saw Jose and Kitty together was a certain tenseness.
And did you see Mr. Menendez or hear him attempting to placate Mrs. Menendez or avoid upsetting her?
Yes, sometimes he would specifically speak of that, not in her presence, that's what he would need to do or have to do.
What would he say?
Objection, cause for speculation.
Overall.
He would speak, and again, I'm trying to remember specific incidents, but he would speak of in a kind of, oh, well, you know what women are like kind of thing. I've got to do anything to, keep her happy kind of thing was the gist of it, not the words.
Okay. Now, you're aware that a few days before he was killed, Mr. Menendez was on a business trip to Connecticut.
Yes, we were on the trip together.
And did you come back from that trip together?
I don't think we did, no.
Were you aware of another trip that was tentatively planned for the following week?
I believe Mr. Menendez was scheduled to go to Minneapolis with one or more of the company executives.
Now, what was in Minneapolis?
Minneapolis was the headquarters of a company called Lieberman Enterprises, one of our largest divisions.
And were there frequent trips by Mr. Menendez and other company executives to Minneapolis to the Lieberman headquarters?
At least monthly.
So this was routine, was it not?
Correct.
And ordinarily, how long, what would be the duration of the Minneapolis trips?
Basically one night. You would leave in an afternoon, spend that night, accomplish what you needed to do during the day, and get the last flight, I think around 6 o'clock, out of Minneapolis to Los Angeles.
Now, in addition to the provision in his employment contract that the company would pay the premiums on a $5 million policy, was there also something called a key man policy that was in effect ensuring the life of Mr. Menendez?
Yes, there was.
And who is the beneficiary on a key man policy?
In this case, the beneficiary was Bankers Trust, the lead bank in a $75 million credit facility, which was granted with the condition that there be this key man insurance policy on Jose's life.
In other words, the bank loaned the money, $75 million, on condition that the key person in the company, Mr. Menendez, have a $15 million insurance policy.
Yes, and of course, while the bank was technically the beneficiary, the money went to pay down our loan, so in effect, the company was the beneficiary.
So if the 15 million happened, then it would reduce the loan, say, from 75 to 60.
Correct.
And was the fact that there was a key man policy, in effect, a matter of public information as part of the company's public statement of its assets, liabilities, that sort of thing?
It required an SEC filings, public filings.
Now, do you recall Mr. Menendez talking about the other policy, the private one that he didn't have?
The only conversations relevant to it, I recall, were relating to, I was present when someone in the company mentioned to him that he had to go to have the physical for it. And at one point, I think he indicated to me that he was delaying taking the physical because he wanted to appear to be a non-smoker for the policy, which of course he was not.
He was a smoker, wasn't he?
Yes.
And to your knowledge, was he making any effort to quit?
Sporadic and very short-lived.
And at this time, of course, you didn't know about what I've shown you in that medical record, that he had suffered an angina.
No.
Now, based on the conversations that you had with Mr. Menendez and based on the conversations you overheard where other company employees told him strike that. The key man policy was in effect, and that clearly required a physical from Mr. Menendez at the time that went into effect. Is that right?
Yes, and my recollection would have been that it was to be taken out quite a while previous to his death, perhaps sometime in early mid-1988.
So it took place, the key man policy physical occurred before the possible angina that medical record reflects.
Absolutely.
And did Mr. Menendez ever express to you any notion that he thought the physical from the key man policy covered the private $5 million policy?
No.
Now, under the terms of, did Mr. Menendez renegotiate his contract at least once while you were working for Live?
Yes.
And do you know if he had to take another physical for the key man policy later on?
I don't know if that was required.
Now, how did you learn of Mr. Menendez's death?
Received a telephone call at my home at about 7:30 Monday morning from someone who worked with me in the financial area saying that he had just heard the news on the radio.
And at some point, was contact made between the company and the Menendez family?
Yes, fairly immediately when Jose's brother-in-law, I believe he was, and Kitty's brother came out to be with the boys.
So contact was made by the uncles, Kitty's brother Brian and Jose's brother-in-law Carlos Baralt. Are those the people you mean?
Those are the people I mean, yes.
And at some point after that contact was made, was a meeting set up?
Yes.
Now, do you know who set up the meeting?
I believe it was set up by Gary Cohen, who was the company's outside counsel.
And was the meeting suggested, if you know, by the company?
I don't know at whose suggestion it took place.
And did you attend the meeting?
Yes.
And do you recall what day the meeting was on?
It was the Tuesday following the death,
And do you know if it was in the morning or the afternoon?
late in the afternoon.
Now, who was at the meeting?
Mr. Baralt, Kitty's brother, his name I forget,
Brian Anderson?
Brian Anderson, Gary Cohen, the lawyer, myself, and I believe also Rod Trovinger, who was sort of the number two person in the financial area.
Was Peter Hoffman at that particular meeting?
No, he was not.
Are you aware of a subsequent meeting later in the week that Peter Hoffman was at?
Yes, I believe that occurred on Friday.
Were you at the Friday meeting?
I was not at that meeting.
Now, at this particular meeting, what was basically the purpose of the meeting as you understood it?
I had been told that I would have to go over for the benefit of the boys and their uncles, the sort of specific financial aspects of the company's obligation. And in this case, we were prepared, of course, to go beyond our legal obligation. I think it included paying Jose's salary for, a amount of time for the interim to be determined, and also to go into some of the aspects of the stock options and tax issues, and also to inform them that the policy that they that was supposed to have been issued on Jose's life directed to his own beneficiaries had never been issued.
Now, when you talk about the legal obligations of the company, were you also going to talk about Mr. Menendez's assets through the company, such as his stock block, his stock options?
Yes, and also there was a very large asset of a deferred compensation account.
In other words, he had deferred receiving income for tax purposes?
Correct.
And were there any loans that were made to Mr. Menendez by the company that his estate would now owe back?
Yes, there was a substantial loan which I believe provided the down payment for the purchase of the Beverly Hills house.
Now, do you recall a point at that meeting on Tuesday when someone, and I'm not sure who, perhaps you could tell us, informed the family that, or told the family, by the way, the $5 million policy provided for in the contract is not in effect?
Yes, yeah, that someone was me.
Okay.
And I informed them and told them that this was due to the fact that Jose had neglected to take the physical, and pointed out that he had been fairly repeatedly reminded of its necessity to do so.
And was that greeted with shock, surprise, reaction?
No.
What was it greeted with?
I remember that Eric looked at me and said, and the companies and the policy in favor of the company, was that in order?
And did you answer him?
I said, yes. And I explained that we would never have been granted the loan by Bankers Trust without it having been in place prior to the granting of the loan.
But with respect to the $5 million policy, there didn't seem to be any surprise or reaction on the part of any of the family members who were there?
No, there did not seem to be surprise. Which surprised me.
Your Honor, I think it's right. My question can be irrelevant.
All right, the answer, that portion of the answer.
Mr. Smith, if I were to tell you in the form of a hypothetical that Carlos Beralt, who was present at that meeting, testified that both his mother-in-law, Maria Menendez, and Lyle Menendez told him before that meeting that Jose had failed to take the physical, would that be consistent with the behavior that you saw at that meeting?
Objection, improper opinion of your
Did they seem to already know that?
Objection, called for speculation.
Sustained. You've already got into this. Move on to something else.
All right. Actually, Your Honor, that was my last question.
Smith, when was the first time you met with the defense attorneys in this case?
First time I met with the defense, a defense attorney, Ms. Abramson, was, I believe, early in 1992. I'm a little unclear, but it was a meeting that took place in New York City with her and I believe a former detective, I forget his last name.
That was a male.
Yes, I believe the investigator for.
And how many times did you meet with the defense in this case?
I believe there were 2 meetings in New York and 1 at their offices in Los Angeles.
Did you have any meetings since you've been called to testify?
Since receiving the subpoena?
Yes.
Yes, 1.
Is that the one you just referred to?
No,
There.
that is a subsequent one. There was 1 at the offices many months ago, and then 1 meeting actually last night.
Now, did the prosecution in this case contact you and ask you if you would be interviewed?
Yes, they did.
And what was your response?
That I did not. I was informed by my lawyer that I was not required to do so, so I declined.
And so you made the choice not to consent to an interview with prosecution, correct?
I made that choice.
Your Honor, I have here a document I'd like to mark it as People's Exhibit next in order. I think that's 319.
319.
Can I approach, please?
Yes.
Showing you Exhibit 319, Mr. Smith, is this the document that you returned to the district attorney's office indicating the fact that you did not want to be interviewed by the prosecution?
Yes, it is.
Now, I take it, Mr. Smith, that you did not like Jose Menendez at all.
I think I've stated that.
And did you ever make any attempts during the course of your tenure at Live to break your contract and cease working with Mr. Menendez?
No, I didn't.
Now, who hired you to work there?
Well, I originally dealt with Peter Hoffman, who then suggested that I meet with Jose and discuss coming to work as the chief financial officer of the new company, the new video company being formed at that time.
Where did you work prior to working at Live, sir?
Immediately prior,
Yes.
I had been the chief executive officer of a small video retailing company called Parallax Video that I had helped found.
Prior to that, where had you worked?
Prior to that, I had been a partner in establishing a video company, a laser disc video company called the Criterion Collection, which it was from late 84 to early 86.
Before that, where did you work?
Warner Communications,
And how long did you work there?
10 years, almost exactly,
So from like 73 to 83?
74 to 84.
When you met with Mr. Menendez, was it more than one meeting before you signed the contract?
There were 2.
Okay, and during your 2 meetings with Mr. Menendez, did you form any opinions about his personality that made you give pause to signing the contract?
Yes, I did.
But you signed it anyway, correct?
Yes.
Now, did Mr. Menendez ever belittle you?
Oh, certainly. I mean, with me, I think he did it to my face, generally without others present.
All right, were you intimidated by him?
No, I wouldn't say I was intimidated by him. I was made uncomfortable by him, but not intimidated.
Were you aware of the financial status of IVE before Mr. Menendez took it over?
Absolutely.
And what was the financial status of the company?
The company was in virtual bankruptcy and everything but name. Totally insolvent.
And did Mr. Menendez turn the company around?
Yes, he did.
Was there anything successful about his management of what became Live Entertainment?
Oh, absolutely. I don't mean anything that I've said about his personality to detract from his abilities as a certain kind of executive.
At the time of his death, what was the financial condition of Live Entertainment?
At which time?
At the time of his death.
The company's financial condition was vastly improved.
Was it, would you consider it to be a healthy company at that
Yes,
time?
at that time it was.
And to whom would you attribute the majority of the responsibility for turning the company around?
To Jose Menendez.
And he did it himself, principally?
Well, he did it, I would say, himself for the first year, but look, to the extent that a chief executive officer of a relatively small company at the time he took over IV had revenues of $30 or $40 million, is the person responsible. It was his strategic plan that the company followed, and those of us who worked with him were basically what caused me to come to work for the company, despite my misgivings about the man, was my belief that he had a very, very sound and intelligent plan to build a company, and subsequent events prove that correct.
And I believe you indicated that IVE had revenues of 30 to 40 million when he took it over?
I believe it was 40. Yeah.
And by the time of his death, what were the revenues of Live?
Well, again, this is partly through acquisition, but I would say for the year 1989, a year that he was there for most of the year, the revenues would be, I'd have to check the records, but in excess of $400 million.
So about 10 times the revenue as when you got there, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you respect Mr. Menendez's abilities?
I respected his intelligence.
Were you aware of anyone at the company who liked Mr. Menendez?
Absolutely. There were quite a few people who I think genuinely liked him.
Okay. Were you aware of an employee there named Vicki Greenleaf?
I knew her quite well.
And to your knowledge, she still works there, is that correct?
No, she was let go by the company some time ago.
All right. Was she there at the time of Mr. Menendez's death?
Yes.
I believe you indicated that your familiarity with Mr. Menendez's sons is that I believe you indicated you see Eric Menendez rarely. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Were you ever entertained in their home?
Yes.
On how many occasions?
On a couple of, sometimes there would be evening meetings, which were the casual sort. A couple of people from the office would go to dinner when they had the house in Calabasas, and there was a couple of such meetings. I believe one where I was alone with the Menendezes, and a couple others where others were present, and in their new house in Beverly Hills.
And during the times that you were in the home, did you ever see Mr. Menendez interact with his children?
Yes.
Right. And what could you describe the nature of the interaction with his children?
Well, what I saw with them together was limited, and I would characterize it as as certainly lacking warmth.
Right. Was he abusive towards them?
Not in my presence.
Pardon me?
Not in my presence.
Did Mr. Menendez ever give you any or tell you anything about his philosophy about giving his children too many advantages and too much money?
I remember one conversation where he spoke of it, but it was a very kind of two-edged sword. He wanted them, on the other hand, to believe that because you're my son, you can do anything. And on the other hand, to somehow prove that they had done things on their own.
Well, did you review the reports of the defense attorneys before you testified here today?
Which reports?
Well, the written reports of notes of the interviews that you had with the defense attorneys. Did you look at those?
Yes, I did.
May I approach, please, Your Honor?
Yes.
Showing you page 10. The part here that's underlined.
Mhm. I saw this in the notes. I remember having said it. I can't, I think, cite a specific moment when I clearly recollect it being said, but it was in some general philosophical discussion.
All right, so you have a general recollection and a philosophical discussion that Mr. Menendez was aware and afraid of giving his children too many advantages and exposing them to too much wealth. Is that fair to say?
It's correct to say that he said it.
All right, so he did say that.
Yes.
Okay. I believe you indicated that Mr. Menendez sometimes displayed anger and that you had a feeling that there was some sort of physicality to that anger. Would that be correct to say?
Correct.
Did he ever hit anyone in your presence?
No,
Did he ever hit you?
certainly not.
Did you ever see him hit his children?
No.
Now, Lyle Menendez worked at Live Entertainment during the summer of 1988. Is that correct?
Correct.
Who did he work for during that period of time?
I don't know exactly. I presume, in a sense, his father, because I had limited dealings with him during that summer.
All right, so you just would see him around the office?
Correct.
Did you have anything to do with any projects or anything he was supposed to be doing?
There was one project that we were, I think, investigating going into the video vending machines in hotels business. And my recollection is that I attempted in some way to get Lyle involved in this, but I think was told that he had other duties that he'd been given.
Now, in terms of the travel, you indicated that at least once a month someone needed to go to Minneapolis to Lieberman Enterprises. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did Mr. Menendez frequently go on the monthly trip?
Yes, mostly.
And in 1989, were you aware of his travel schedule?
The trip that's been referred to, the impending trip the week following his death?
Well, no, I mean, generally, were you aware of how frequently he traveled in?
Oh, I was generally aware of his location at all times in case I needed to reach him on the business matter.
And how often would you say he traveled out of town on business per month?
I would say 3 times a month would probably be a good guess.
And would these trips be of many days duration or one day, or what was the general frequency, length of the trip?
Typical would be two-night trips, 1 to 2 night trips. An exception in 1989 was we went on a tour to place $110 million worth of the company's bonds, and that was a trip of, I think, at least a week's duration where we were together the entire time.
Did you ever have fun with him?
No.
Did you ever, well, I believe you indicated you went to his home on occasion.
Yes.
Was that ever for social purposes?
Well, there was a Christmas party at which all of the salaried employees, I guess would be the cutoff, were invited to his house.
Did you have key man insurance?
No.
When was the last time you saw Jose Menendez?
I believe the Friday before his death.
And where did you see him?
Well, actually, that was the week we were in New York, and I think we split off and went. I don't know whether I stayed in New York. I don't think I stayed over the weekend. I came back to Los Angeles, but I could not be specific. But sometime toward the end of that week, it is possible that the last time was on this trip to Connecticut and New York, or maybe in the office the following Thursday or Friday. But
All right,
I
so
can't be certain.
do you don't have any specific recollection when the last time was that you saw Mr. Menendez?
No, I don't.
And when you learned of his death on the 21st of August of 1989, you didn't think back to when the last time was that you'd seen him?
No.
Now, the last time that you did see him when you were in Connecticut, did you notice any change in his behavior during the period of time that you were with him? Did he seem tense or unusually unhappy or anything like that?
No, I wouldn't say so.
Now, in the video distribution business, are there people, well, let me back up. IVE was purchased from a man named Noel Bloom. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what is your understanding as to Mr. Bloom's criminal connections?
Your Honor, I believe this is outside the scope.
Overall,
I have no personal knowledge of any criminal connections of Noel Bloom.
Do you have any reputation knowledge of any criminal connections of Noel Bloom?
The company which was purchased by Carroll Co., which was called the IVE, Noel Bloom's company, had a division which was involved in producing pornography or adult films, let us say. And we specifically, and I was not there at the time, so this is all things that I learned subsequent to arriving at the company nearly a year later, but that our purchase totally and carefully excluded any of the assets or activities of the adult film division, which was retained by Mr. Bloom. Now, in common, anybody in that business, rightly, wrongly, fairly, or unfairly, is assumed to have some kind of, quote, criminal connections.
You are aware of the fact that some people involved in the video distribution of pornography are alleged to have ties to criminal enterprise. Would that be fair to say?
I think I just said that, yes.
All right. But of course, you can't assume that about everyone, correct?
No, what I'm saying, but some people assume it about everyone in that business.
All right. But some of the people in that business do, in fact, have character traits which one could term seedy. Would that be fair to say?
I'm going to object to this sort of character assassination of the entire industry.
Overall. Yes.
Okay.
I have had myself limited dealings with such people, but seedy would be an extremely accurate word.
Extremely accurate?
Accurate.
Okay. Did Live distribute pornography?
No.
Did Mr. Menendez ever talk to you about his feelings about Live distributing pornography?
He was utterly and totally opposed to it.
Okay. Did you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
As a business matter.
Correct. I wasn't asking you a moral
Right.
sense.
That's why I was qualifying.
All right. Now, I believe you indicated that there was some talk around the company about the fact that Mr. Menendez had not taken the physical necessary to fulfill the $5 million policy. Is that correct?
I don't know about, quote, some talk around the company. I had a specific conversation with somebody who worked for me who reported to me that this had not happened.
Was that Mr. Trovinger?
Mr. Trovinger.
Do you have any knowledge that Jose Menendez knew that he had not yet taken the physical?
A conversation many months prior to his death between us had made a reference to his need to take the physical, but that was, my guess would be in the spring of '89.
Now, the meeting that you've referred to with the family, I think you indicated that the people who were there was Brian Anderson, Carlos Baralt, some executives from Live, yourself, and who else?
And Gary Cohen, who is the outside counsel, so he's not an executive, he's an independent attorney.
And both defendants were there, is that correct?
Both defendants were there.
Was there a woman there named Marta Cano?
I don't remember her being there, so my recollection is no.
All right, and you did not attend the Friday meeting, is that correct?
Correct.
All right, and at this meeting then, I believe you indicated that it was your job to tell someone that the $5 million policy was not in effect, is that correct?
At the Tuesday meeting, yes.
Okay. May I have a moment, please, Your Honor?
I'm all set.
Right.
Now, was there any discussion as to why it was necessary to tell someone to make the announcement about the $5 million policy?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this. This is calling for fourth court hearsay.
Rephrase the question.
All right, so you were told that you were going to make this announcement about the $5 million policy?
Yes.
Okay, and when during the meeting did you make the announcement?
I can't remember precisely when, but not at the beginning, but toward the end, I would guess.
And so what exactly did you say?
My recollection is that I said, look, I'm not sure that you are aware of this, but Jose's contract called for the company to pay the premiums on a $5 million policy wherein he could name the beneficiaries. However, that policy, due to Jose's failure to take a physical that was required before it could be granted, had in fact never been issued.
And when you made that statement, did either Eric Menendez or Lyle Menendez say, we knew that already?
They did not say that.
Did they say anything when you made the announcement?
Yes, I will say, I think exactly what I said before. Eric said, and the policy in favor of the company was that in order. I think those were his exact words.
And what was his tone of voice when he said that, sir?
Extremely level and undramatic.
Was he crying at that time?
Absolutely not.
What was Lyle Menendez's reaction, if any, when you informed him in his brother's presence that the policy was not in effect?
I noted no reaction.
No, none at all. Is that
No.
correct? After this particular meeting with the defendants and after you made this inform them of this policy or the lack of the policy. Did you have any further meetings with them that week?
Yes, I met with them at the memorial service, which took place on Thursday or Friday. I can't remember which.
You spoke at the memorial service, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Did you speak well of Jose Menendez when you did that?
Of course,
Did you feel like a hypocrite?
a little bit.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Any redirect?
Yes, just a few things.
Mr. Smith, turning your attention to Vicky Greenleaf, I believe that's someone that Mrs. Bozanich just mentioned. You said she was let go by the company?
My understanding is she was let go sometime, perhaps within about a year ago or so ago.
Was she someone that you were particularly close with at the company?
Her duties brought us into frequent contact.
Was she, in your opinion, when you were acting president of this company, a valuable employee?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
Did you say anything? Well, first of all, do you know if you saw Vicky Greenleaf after the Tuesday meeting that you've just described?
I have no specific recollection. Immediately after?
Anytime after? Well, yes.
yeah,
Let's start with immediately after.
Immediately, I have no recollection, but it's possible.
Do you recall ever saying anything to Vicky Greenleaf about your impressions concerning the killing of Mr. Menendez or his family or anything like that after Mr. Menendez was killed?
Not anything specific. No.
Is there any reason why you wouldn't have said anything specific to her?
Well, I didn't trust Ms. Greenleaf, and I would have been extremely circumspect in anything I said to her.
You said you attended some meetings at the Calabasas home of Mr. Menendez.
Yes.
Did you notice the condition of that home?
Well, it looked like they'd barely moved in. There were packing boxes, and there was, I think, it was a rented house, I knew, and it looked like it was rented furniture. I don't know if it was or not.
Was there a particular room that had packing boxes in it?
I recall as you came in the door, there was some room, I think, empty other than boxes, yes.
And do you know if they lived in that house for some 2.5 years?
I think that was the period, yes.
And over the entire time that you knew Mr. Menendez, did it always look like they had just moved in?
All the times I was there.
You said you had observed the interaction between Mr. Menendez and his sons, and you described it as lacking warmth.
Yes, but I had a limited opportunity to make that observation.
Did the sons appear to be respectful and dutiful on the occasions
Yes,
when you
yes.
saw them? Now, this particular conversation where Mr. Menendez is talking about, I guess, what he wants for his children. Did Mr. Menendez talk to you about his own background?
Quite a bit, yeah.
And was his story did he express his story to you as a poor boy from poverty who, by his own efforts, became a millionaire?
Objection beyond scope.
Sustained.
Was the discussion about his boys and their advantages interlinked by Mr. Menendez with his own background?
He had certainly made it clear to me that for a period of his time following leaving Cuba, that he had to suffer what he described as the sort of indignity of working in kitchens and putting himself through school, and that this had been a shock to him, having come from I assume, upper middle class background in Cuba.
So he didn't start out as a poor boy. It's just when he got to the United States, he had to support himself.
That was
Cause for speculation.
Objection sustained. The answer is stricken.
Is that what he was telling you, that he came from something of an upper class background?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
Now, could you explain to us, I'll just get to that. In in the section of the report that Mrs. Bazanich showed you, do you recall a statement from yourself that Mr. Menendez's philosophy was, quote, "You are my son, you must be me"?
Yes.
Okay. And as far as you understood it, that was his philosophy towards his children. They had to be him.
Well, they had to be winners. And of course, he thought of himself as a winner.
And you said he made the statement that he was afraid of giving his kids too many advantages and exposing them to too much wealth.
That was he made the statement, but as typical of Jose, very often his stated beliefs and his behavior were at variance.
And how, in this case, you didn't believe that he felt that way, in other words.
Sustained.
Did you accept this at face value?
Objection, proper opinion.
Sustained.
What did you mean, Mr. Smith, when you said to Mrs. Bazanich that, yes, Mr. Menendez said those words?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
What was the behavior of Mr. Menendez that you felt was in contravention to that statement of his?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Well, Your Honor, I'd like to approach.
No, let's move on to something else.
No, I'd like,
Let's
this is
move
my
on to
last
something else.
area.
Okay. Last few questions is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, you may approach. By the way, does the defense have any more witnesses today?
No.
Okay, so once we finish this, ladies and gentlemen, you'll be on your way until we come back. So I'll give you some more information about the schedule in a few moments.
Now, did Mr. Menendez tell you that he expected his sons to behave like him?
Yes.
And did he also expect them to be unpretentious?
Is that what he said? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
I don't remember any such words.
You used the word unpretentious in describing to me what Mr. Menendez was saying to you. Is that correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
What was he saying to you about how he wanted his boys to act and be?
On frequent occasions, he would talk to me or others present, not necessarily to me alone, but sometimes alone, about his methods of instilling character in his sons. This was a subject of great importance to him. And as I, and listened to it, it struck me as hypocritical.
Your Honor, I move to strike the opinion of the witnesses improper.
Objection sustained. How it struck the witness is stricken. Jury is admonished to disregard it.
Okay. Did he, you actually heard him talking to his sons, particularly on the phone, is that correct?
Yes.
And was what you heard different than what he would say during these discussions that you've just described?
Objection, calls for opinion on the part of the witness.
Overruled.
Yes, it was. What I heard was of the be a winner. That's it. Don't ever lose. Don't show weakness.
Now, did you ever have any reason to believe, based on anything Mr. Menendez ever said, that he thought the physical, he being Mr. Menendez, thought the physical for the $15 million policy applied to both policies?
I had specific information to the contrary from Mr. Menendez.
I have nothing further.
Any recross?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you. You may step down. You're excused. All right. As far as the schedule, as I indicated to you, we won't be in session next Monday or Tuesday, and counsel have indicated to me, as you've heard, there are no more witnesses for today. Lawyers and I will be here this afternoon discussing other matters, and you'll have witnesses available and here on Tuesday morning. Is that correct? Or Wednesday morning, I'm sorry. Okay. And after we come back on Wednesday morning, I'll be in a better position to give the jurors more information as far as the schedule, how we're doing and things of that sort. But there are some matters that still have to be resolved, and the lawyers have to make certain decisions, and those decisions relate to how many more witnesses will be testifying on either side. So we have to get some more information before I can give you an idea of how our progress has been so far and where we're going to end up or when we're going to end up with the conclusion of the trial. So at this point, what I'm going to do is excuse you all until Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock. We want both juries back here Wednesday at 9 o'clock. Again, please remember not to permit yourselves to be exposed to anything about this case in any form whatsoever outside of the courtroom. You must make your decision based only on what happens in the courtroom and my instructions on the law. And don't form any final opinions about this case until you've heard all the evidence and all the arguments of the lawyers and my instructions on the law. And then when you go into the jury room, that's when you start making your decisions in this case. We'll wish you all a good weekend and see you all back here Wednesday at 9 o'clock.